And again, welcome everyone to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Columbus. My name is John Mallory Land, and I'll be your volunteer service leader for this morning. We are an inclusive community of folks who are encouraging one another as each of us travels on our own personal spiritual journey. Some of us regard this as a religious community. Some think of it as a spiritual fellowship. For others, it's an ethical oasis. In any event, it's a coming together of people we love and who love us. As we support each other in our own respective searches for truth and meaning, we also take action together to strengthen our fellowship and to make our local community and the world better places in which to live. The flaming chalice symbolizes reason, tolerance, and freedom, and also justice, compassion, and love. May its light illuminate our lives and its warmth comfort us. And now we're going to have our offertory, and we welcome your offerings, big or small. They strengthen our fellowship, and whether they're offerings of money or of your time, talents, and energy, they're given and received in the spirit of great fellowship. To accompany the taking of the offering, Whittaker is going to play for us An die Musik by Franz Schubert, and he'll be singing in German, but we've provided the English translation in case you'd like to know what it means.
Lebens
So thank you. That was awesome. And now we're going to be regaled by a reading from Danielle Neal, our expatriate member in Pennsylvania. She's kindly provided us a quote to go along with our presentation today from Abhijit Naskar, and it's an audio rendition today.
Thank you for letting me read for you today. It has been a long time. I would like to share with you a quote from Abhijit Naskar's book, Lives to Serve Before I Sleep. The term altruism indicates a separation between an observer of altruism and a practitioner of altruism. And so long as there prevails this separation, this duality between the observer and the observed, real action will always remain a theory for the majority of the human population. So, right now, with the plain, ordinary awareness of the harms of separation, destroy the duality that prevails within you, which separates your being from real action. And the moment you do so, piety and progress will automatically begin to rush through your veins out into the world, like the water that begins to flow once you turn on the faucet. I hope your faucet is ever flowing today, and you have a great Sunday.
We so appreciate Danielle's contribution, even from afar. He always has a very pithy observation to add. Well, we've come to the main event. Our speaker today, Jacob Woessner, is a senior at Columbus State University and is currently studying biology. After graduating college, he hopes to pursue an MD and a PhD and become a physician scientist. His talk today will explore the effective altruism movement, which aims to address the question, given the resources we have, how can we do the most good? Jacob first discovered effective altruism after hearing a talk given by the philosopher Peter Singer, and since then has strived to get others involved in the movement as well. Effective altruism is a very broad movement that encompasses many broad issues. This talk today will focus on several of these important cause areas. So let's give a warm welcome to Jacob Woessner.
All right. So like was said, I'm here to talk to you guys about effective altruism today, and I'd also like to show you guys some basic tools you can use to figure out the best way to help others. So before I talk about the principles of effective altruism, I first like to introduce this charity called Play Pumps International. So here are the play pumps, and the play pumps were invented to solve two major issues. First, an effective way to pump water for villagers in sub-Saharan Africa, and second, to provide children a fun way for playing. That's where the play pumps comes in. So now, water insecurity is a very important issue in the developing world, and about like 1,000 children die every day because of waterborne illnesses. Also, many children become sick because of this. Now, when I first heard about this charity, I thought it seemed pretty good. And also, many people in the celebrity world, as well as famous figures such as Bill Clinton, also thought it was a very interesting charity. And the charity ended up raising like several $1 million to fund their endeavor. And so they're able to create a bunch of these play pumps and distribute dozens of them throughout sub-Saharan Africa. Now, there are actually major problems with this charity. So, but first I'd like to describe just a little bit how they work. So here you can see the children are spinning the pump around, and the pump is first pumped into a water tower, which then can be distributed throughout the village. So there were major problems with this charity. So one, the children didn't really like to play on these play pumps. They were actually very hard to spin around. So that often meant that the women of the village actually had to pump these pumps themselves. So it was often left to them to do that. Another thing was that they're very hard to fix. So that people, when the pumps were broken, they would often have to wait several months before they could get them fixed. So they often just replaced these pumps with their previous pumps before. So this is where the effective altruism movement comes in. So like was said previously, this movement aims to figure out how you can do the most good given the resources that you have. And there's 4 main ways that effective altruism aims to address this. So the first is using evidence and analysis. The second is cost effectiveness or time effectiveness. The third is having a broad moral circle. And the fourth is cause prioritization. So the first one I'd like to focus on is using evidence and analysis. And to do this, I'd like to explain another charity. This charity is called Dispensers for Safe Water. This charity provides water for children in sub-Saharan Africa like the play pumps, but instead what they do is they actually provide chlorine for people in sub-Saharan Africa so they can treat the water themselves when they collected it. So to address this, what they basically did is they had 2 control groups like you do with like scientific experiments, right? So in the pharmaceutical industry with COVID, right, you have the experimental group and then the control group. So this is what they did here. So here you see the experimental group where they're given the chlorine tablets, and here's the control group without the tablets, just the normal pump. And this allowed them to demonstrate that the treatment was actually very effective. So here's a graph just showing the different treatments for preventing water-borne illnesses. So on the left side of the graph, you can see piped water and sewage sanitation. And that only provides about 6 months of life years spent or added per $1,000. But on the right side, you have something like zinc therapy, which basically adds zinc to existing water treatments, and that gives about 32 years of life. So as you can see, it's a very wide range of effectiveness. So you can also expand this to non-water treatment groups. So for instance, here's a graph just showing all the global health interventions in general. So on the left, you can't even kind of see how many years it adds, so it's very small. But on the right, you have very effective treatments. So to illustrate this, I'd like to talk a little bit about blindness. So does anybody know how much it costs to raise a seeing eye dog in the US? Would anyone like to guess? So someone said $3,000. Is there any more guesses? Yeah, that's actually a lot closer. So it actually costs about $30,000 to $40,000 to raise a seeing eye dog in the US. And we actually give these away to people for free, right? So anybody who needs a seeing eye dog can get one for free. But in countries like Kenya and sub-Saharan Africa, it costs about $2,000 to save a child and cure their blindness. So there's many ways they actually do this. So one of them is vitamin A supplements. Another way is just cataract surgery. So like people have cataracts in the US, and those only cost around $2,000 on average to perform these surgeries. And this is especially important in my opinion because like if you're blind in a country like Kenya, you can't work, right? Agricultural jobs depend on you being able to see. And they don't have the same social safety net we have in the US. So the cost effectiveness kind of exists on a scale, right? So before you have things that are very cost effective and have high levels of certainty. So these are like some of the interventions I mentioned before. So like the water supplementation. And on the other side of the scale, you have things that are extremely cost effective, but might not have as much levels of certainty. So those would be like experimental vaccines, right? Or government policy that might not necessarily work, but when they do work, they're extremely cost effective. So I'd also like to talk about our moral circle. And this basically is the idea of like who you consider when you want to help others. So the first part of the moral circle is our friends and family, right? Most people want to help our friends and family, and that makes sense because they're who we're closest to. But effective altruism is all about considering other people you might not necessarily have your intuition lead you to. So the next is obviously our community. So this is people living in the US or Columbus. And but effective altruists aim to expand our moral circle because only about 6% of charity in the US actually goes to people in these low-income countries, right? This includes all religious and private and public charity, including government intervention too. So we like to expand our moral circle to all people as well. But effective altruists take this even further, and they even consider animals too, right? Because a lot of effective altruists believe that animals experience the same pain we do, so we should prioritize their well-being as well. And then that leads us to our final part of the moral circle. This is future generations, right? As we previously discussed, we shouldn't care about where people are located, right? Just because they're in Africa, that doesn't mean we should prioritize their life less than ours. So I also think we shouldn't prioritize when they live, right? We should also care about future generations and their well-being as well. So the next is cause prioritization. This is really focused on what causes we should look at and how we evaluate why we should look at them. So effective altruists usually use 3 criteria for choosing a cause we should focus on. So the first is the problem large in scale? So this basically means, does the problem affect a lot of people and future generations as well? So this can be animals, right? People. Is it a very large issue? The second is this issue trackable? This basically means that can resources do good in solving this issue, and is it easy to solve? Like, for instance, you want to solve the easiest issues first, and then move on to the harder ones because it's more cost effective that way. That's what trackable is referring to. The third is this problem neglected? That means, is this issue one that a lot of people don't focus on, right? So once an issue becomes less neglected, that means you want to focus on something else because then you could be most efficient with your resources as well. So the first major area for cause prioritization, like I mentioned, is poverty elimination. So there's this charity evaluator that I like. It's called GiveWell, and it does some of the research I mentioned before, like to make sure the charities perform randomized controlled trials and recommend them. So have you guys heard of like Charity Evaluator before? Or Charity Navigator? Yeah, so I prefer GiveWell over Charity Navigator because they actually make sure that the charities perform trials, and Charity Navigator only looks at overhead. So there's this thing called the myth of overhead, and it's basically like you actually do want you want your charities to have good administration, right? For instance, like think of it like a business. Businesses are driven by profits, right? So they want to maximize their profits. But charities are not beholden to the same market principles, right? So if a business is not doing well, it'll fail. But because the way charities work is that the people who donate to the charities don't directly benefit from them. So even an ineffective charity can exist because when you donate to a charity, you're not directly benefiting from it. So that's a little bit of a I think it doesn't really work with charities because they're not beholden to market principles. So that's why I don't think overhead is an important thing you should focus on. So another thing, like I said, is animal welfare is also important to effective altruists. And around like 80 billion animals are in factory farms. And when I first heard this statistic, I was very shocked. And so effective altruism also aims to address their welfare as well. And there's another charity researcher called Animal Charity Evaluators, and they're kind of like GiveWell as they rank charities and evaluate the ones that are most beneficial to animals. So one of the charities that they recommend that I like is this charity called the Good Food Institute. And what they do is they research and develop meat alternatives that are identical to the real thing. Because their idea is basically that like we can't convince everybody to be vegan, so it's better to make a product that's identical to the real thing. That's one thing they try to do. So the fourth area of concern of effective altruism is like really large catastrophic events and trying to prevent them. So the first is obviously nuclear war, which most people are familiar with. The second they try to prevent is like natural disasters like pandemics. The third is like climate change. And the fourth is the emergence of new technologies that could be dangerous, right? Like synthetic viruses. So that's one thing they focus on eliminating. And there's a lot of research that goes into this, and it's actually really neglected. So it's a very important area of concern. So, so this is something that I discovered that's really interesting. So there's this charity, effective altruist charity called Giving What We Can, and they have this How Rich Am I calculator. And I was really shocked when I first saw this because I did not know like how stark the differences in income is. So for instance, on this one, if you earned $48,000, you're richer than about 98% of all people on the globe. And that's about 17 times the world median. So I left the link up there and a QR code if you guys want to scan it later and see how rich you are compared to the average world population. So another thing that you can do that effective altruism focuses on, which might not apply to everyone, is career choice. So often cases, it's not just about where you donate, it's also about what your career does. So there's this organization, 80,000 Hours, and they look at effective careers and pick some of the best ones you can do. But honestly, this doesn't apply to everyone, so it's okay if you don't want to look into this. So yeah. So here are a few ways that I recommend most people can do that don't involve drastic changes. So like changing your career is pretty difficult. But so the first one is donate to some of these effective charities. So the first one, the Against Malaria Foundation, provides insecticide-treated bed nets to people in Africa, and it's about $2 per bed net. So it's one of GiveWell's top charity. I think it's the first one. The second one is the Keller International Charity, and what they do is they provide vitamin A pills to children living in sub-Saharan Africa and to prevent blindness, like I previously mentioned. The third charity, I was actually surprised that this is one of their top rated, but it's just providing cash incentives for people in sub-Saharan Africa to get a vaccine. Because a lot of them, like, they don't know that they can get the vaccine, and a lot of their communities, like, they don't have a lot of healthcare knowledge. So this provides them with like education as well as an incentive to get the vaccine. So a second thing that I recommend you can do is starting an effective altruist group. There's lots of websites online that go into this, and there's also a website where you can look up effective altruist groups. So there's one for Florida, Georgia, or in the South that I'm not a part of, but I've seen it. I'm a part of a different group, but that's definitely one thing you can do personally to get more involved in the movement. So another thing you can do is take a giving pledge. I've done this personally, but basically you pledge to donate a portion of your income every year to effective charities, and they also provide you support too. So they really try to incentivize you to keep your pledge, and that has to do with the Giving What We Can charity that I mentioned before. They're also focused on doing the pledges. So the fourth thing I recommend is just telling someone new about what you've learned today. And this is actually a lot more important than I previously thought, because one thing that me personally, this showed me is that one of my friends, I told him about effective altruism, and then he ended up starting a group at his university, and they have about 60 members now. So it's he's at Georgia Tech, so they started a group there. So yep. So I guess that's my presentation. So does anyone have any questions? Yes. Oh, right there.
Very helpful news we can use. One relatively minor, but one thing that came to my mind was people feel good about donating food to the Feeding the Valley, which is a good thing. But I had heard it explained that it was much more effective to donate money, because the buying power they have if they're buying in bulk, if they're getting a better rate at a wholesale level, they can more effectively help a greater number of people than if we go to the grocery store and pay retail for yams and donate them. So there's always a lot to think about with charitable giving, and that gives us a lot of food for thought. So thank you again. A couple other things I wanted to throw in real quick before I forget. Number one, the Christmas tree is beautiful. Thank you to the folks who put that up. It's a lovely addition. Also, happy Hanukkah to everyone. I believe